Good evening. My name is Sarah Fawn Miller, and I am the Director of Professional Development, as well as a board member of the UGA Atlanta Alumni Chapter. One of our initiatives of the Professional Development Committee is to inspire engagement in not only professional topics, but educational ones that are relevant to our chapter members. So we thank you for taking the time out today for this Monumental Discussions webinar. We hope that you find it both educational and inspiring. And I know that our Atlanta chapter has been looking forward to this event for many, many months now, and we are absolutely thrilled to be able to host you this evening. Before we kick things off, I'll go over a little flow of show so you know what to expect. I will be introducing our moderator tonight in a moment, and she will then introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote will provide a brief introductory presentation on historic monuments, and then our moderator will be back. She will be conducting the discussion that follows based on a list of prepared questions, as well as pre-submitted questions that have been submitted by the registrants for this event. Time permitting, she will also be taking live questions from this audience that are submitted via the Zoom chat function. So we do encourage you throughout the entire program to use that chat function freely. All of the questions will be visible to the panelists, the speakers. So with that, thank you again for spending your time with us today. I am honored to be able to introduce to you our moderator for this evening, Dr. Dawn Bennett-Alexander, or Dr. BA as she is sometimes called. Dr. BA is a tenured associate professor of employment law and legal studies at Terry, and she is licensed to practice law in DC and 6 federal jurisdictions, and had a very impressive legal career in DC before entering the world of academia. Dr. BA is published extensively in the employment law area with emphasis on race, gender, and sexual orientation issues. She has been conducting diversity and employment law seminars for all audiences from both the public and the private sectors for 37 years, recently including a TED Talk on practical diversity. Dr. BA has received over 50 awards and recognitions for her exemplary service and teaching, and among those is UGA's highest award for diversity, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Building Bridges Award. So all of this is to say you're in excellent hands this evening, and Dr. BA, we could not be more honored to have you. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for this really important discussion. We're honored to have Sheffield Hale with us today to discuss the historical background and context of Confederate monuments, and we're lucky to be able to have him. Sheffield Hale is the president and CEO of the Atlanta History Center. Prior to joining the center in 2012, he served as chief counsel of the American Cancer Society, Inc., and was a partner practicing corporate law at the law firm of Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton, LLP. Sheffield also serves as a trustee and board member for many nonprofit and charitable organizations. Sheffield is a UGA alum, and he received his undergraduate degree in history in 1982 and has been actively involved with the University of Georgia ever since, making a really good example for you all as alumni. So we've asked Sheffield to come speak to you this evening about a topic that he and the Atlanta History Center have actually been researching for years, the history and context around the Confederate monuments. Sheffield has been covered by every media outlet you can think of about this issue, including the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, and USA Today, just to name a few. The hot button issues surrounding monuments and their meanings have increasingly become relevant in the media, in the broader community, and It comes at a time of great political polarization in the country. However, Sheffield and the Atlanta History Center have been leading discussions on this topic with folks of every political persuasion for years. So I'm now going to turn it over to Sheffield, who will make an introductory presentation that'll lay the groundwork for our discussion for this evening. Sheffield.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah, so tonight I want to talk about monuments and how you can talk to your family about them over Thanksgiving. One of the things that I was asked to do is to come up with an idea. What could you talk about that would take people's mind off the election, coronavirus, and everything else, and surprise them? And I said, how about Confederate monuments? And they were too polite to say no. So let's get on with it and talk about it very quickly. And I'm going to cover these slides quickly. I've been told that there aren't any Georgia Tech graduates online, so that I can use big words and could go fast. So Monumental Discussions. I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to show you people new information, and I think you'll learn some new information, and then we can talk about that. First of all, monuments are an international issue. Woof. They are, it's not just in the United States, it's all over the country. Woof, change the slide, please, ma'am. There we go. So, for example, Stalin. There were Stalin statues all throughout the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. After Stalin died, these statues were all erased except for one left in Gori. But look at the next one, woof. There's Uncle Joe on the ground in Hungary. They didn't take him long to get him on the ground. That's one way of dealing with complex statues. Next. Another way is the way they did it in India. After the Raj, the British left, they took a lot of their monuments, this in Delhi, and put them all into a park. This has been suggested for Confederate monuments, but this is one of the ways they did it in Delhi. And by the way, all of these examples I'm showing you are just examples, not necessarily suggestions by Sheffield Hale. Next. Stalin's World, on my bucket list of places to go in Lithuania. As soon as COVID's over, I'm going. Look how much fun you can have climbing all over Uncle Joe. Another way of doing this, again, Confederate parks have been suggested as well. Next slide. Here's Edward Colston going into Bristol Harbor this year. He had the misfortune of people reading up on him and figuring out he was a slave trader and made his fortune doing that. He endowed most of the cultural institutions in Bristol. He was one of the most famous men in Bristol, and now he's at the bottom of Bristol Harbor. Some people are thinking about bringing him up and putting him in a museum to talk about how he was taken off his pedestal and literally thrown into the bay. Next. One of my favorite and most creative statues is of ways of dealing with taking a statue of Vladimir Lenin and turning him into Darth Vader, complete with a Wi-Fi headset. Next. And of course, perhaps the most succinct, and this was also done in Athens, but how sad, second place ribbon on the Confederate monument in Oxford, Mississippi. This is an example of very concise contextualization, and contextualization of Confederate monuments is something we're going to talk about more of as we go along, but it doesn't get any better than this one. And so what we're talking about now is public spaces and how do we deal with them with these different monuments. And it's a very complicated issue, and it's also an issue that, like I said, it surprises you. So let's go on and learn a little bit more about Confederate monuments in particular. Next. So here's a chart showing the three major periods of the installation and building Confederate monuments. First group is right after the Civil War, death and mourning, funereal monuments. Think about it, 20% of white males of military age were killed in the South. So there was a lot of death and mourning. So this is, and most of the monuments of that period, like the one we see at Oakland Cemetery, which is a huge obelisk and was erected in 1870, are from that earlier period. Fast forward, after Reconstruction, after Redemption, after the white power structure gets back into power, after Plessy versus Ferguson and the Jim Crow laws are beginning to be enacted, there's a massive wave from 1890s to 1930s of monuments, building names, and that's where you see most of them coming from. So these aren't generally monuments that are, these are not the ancient monuments you think they are many times. 1920s, this is where you would see, for example, equestrian statues of generals on a horse. There's a great example in Atlanta on the Capitol grounds of John B. Gordon, only equestrian statue in the city. 1907, that's about power, an assertion of power. That's not about loss and who's in charge. And so you see these monuments being proliferated throughout the South and the North at the same time. That's true as well. There are different monuments up there, but they look very similar. But all the courthouse ones you see, most of those are done from the early 1900s through late 1920s. Then there's a lull. And this is where the first Stone Mountain carving effort is begun, is in that first period. And we'll go back and talk about that later. But that's the height of Jim Crow segregation. And that's one of the reasons these monuments are highly controversial. They were erected by the white power structure without input from African Americans. Next, Stone Mountain. So you see in 1954, you can't see it on your chart there. There's basically no monuments being built. All of a sudden, boom, 1954, what happens? Next slide. Brown versus Board of Education. So massive resistance. So let's go back to the first part of the carving and go to Stone Mountain. We're going to use Stone Mountain as our example. It's in nobody's necessarily their hometown. It's everybody's because it's owned by the state of Georgia. It is a statewide monument. So let's talk about it. 1914, Helen Plain, UDC president, Confederate widow. She proposes that they take the side of Stone Mountain and put a bust on it. Well, that's good with the Venable family who owned Stone Mountain at the time. And they think that's a good thing. And then the next year, the Ku Klux Klan is actually resurrected on top of Stone Mountain. Okay. That's really in direct response to the birth of a nation, which at that point venerated and showed how the Klan had saved the South. And Helen Plain herself said that they should add the Klan to the mountain at that time because in her words, they, quote, saved us from Negro domination and carpetbag rule. So it gets really complicated when you start talking about Stone Mountain at this period. That 1916, the Stone Mountain Memorial Association is incorporated, and Gutzon Borglum, who later carved Mount Rushmore, is hired as the carver. Next. Here's a picture of Gutzon Borglum. He's got some great jodhpurs on and working on the horse. And here's his maquette. That is his model that he's working on. At the same time, he's been working on the head of General Lee. But he gets into a fight with the Ku Klux Klan inter-party, internecine fighting. He's a member of the Klan or associated with the Klan, and he gets on the wrong side of leadership. He's essentially run out of town, and before he does, he blows up, destroys his maquette. When he's gone out at that point, the Stone Mountain Memorial Association next, and the Klan blows his head off the mountain. Okay, so I want to stipulate here that this is not Sheffield's solution to Stone Mountain, but as a lawyer, I have to stipulate that this is precedent. Past is not necessarily prologue, but this is a surprise. People don't know that this has happened before. In this case, it was the Ku Klux Klan's infused Stone Mountain Memorial Association of that day, different from the one that exists today, that blew it up. So just keep that in mind. So they hired Augustus Lukeman next, who then created head of Lee and part of the horse. And this was dedicated in 1928. Now think about it, it's 1928. This is a year before the crash. Lindbergh is flying his airplane around. This is pretty much modern times. Note the American flag here. At this point in time, there was a lot about reconciliation, and we can talk about reconciliation lines, North and South. Next slide, please. Woof. There he is, Robert E. Lee IV. He is the embodiment of reconciliation. Confederate flag, U.S. flag. But just to make a small point here, most of the flags you would see here and at Ku Klux Klan rallies and at other rallies at the time that were of white supremacist origin were mainly United States flags. Next. So here's the carving as it was finished in 1928. It stayed the same way until 1964 when they restarted the carving. Let me repeat that again. This was all that was there. So this is not an ancient monument. This is a monument that was the head of which, the beginning of which was completed in 1928, and it wasn't restarted until 1964. Now, this Depression came along. There were a couple of efforts to restart it. Nothing had enough juice. Nobody had any money. They tried to start it during the war. There wasn't any money. And so it lay dormant until, guess what happened next? Brown versus Board of Education, boom, 1954, separate but equal. In May, 57 days later, Marvin Griffin promises at a campaign rally to purchase the mountain from the Venable family who still owned it and who still had given an easement to the Klan to use it, and they used it for all their ceremonies each year, and to finish the carving. He was elected governor on a segregationist platform that year. 1956, he had the state government passes a law to attempt to declare Brown null and void. He then also signs the law incorporating the Georgia battle flag, the Confederate battle flag, and the Georgia state flag. You remember that controversy from 20 years ago? 1958, the state purchases Stone Mountain, finally from the Venable family. Now, this purchase of Stone Mountain and the flag, state flag thing are part and parcel of the same era, of the same effort, of the same massive resistance to integration. This is not about Lee and Jackson and Jefferson Davis. This was about resistance to federally mandated integration coming out of Brown versus Board of Education. And that's why we call it a massive resistance monument. Next. And so what I also often say is listen to what people say during their time, not what Sheffield says about what something means. Listen to what they say. Look for the facts. So for example, here's what Governor Griffin said. Completion of the memorial will be of everlasting benefit to the present generation and all future citizens of this state and the Southland. Now, when attempts are being made to destroy our very way of life, it will serve as a rallying point for all of us who believe in presenting the ideals for which our forefathers fought. Okay, Governor Griffin, here's what he means. In case everybody has forgotten what our way of life is, that is segregation. That is Jim Crow. That is the way of life that he's attempting to preserve. The fact is that it does serve as a rallying point, probably for a lot of people who would agree with him today. And that's some of the conflict that you do see out at Stone Mountain, and it attracts people who have those ideals to this day. Next slide. So more appropriate people to put on Stone Mountain, in my view, are not the triumvirate that is there now, but how about Marvin Griffin, the governor? There he is signing the state flag, putting the Confederate flag on it. Or Governor Lester Maddox here in 1964, removing a customer from his Pickwick restaurant over there on the Georgia Tech campus. Next slide. Now, and this is, and in a case of showing you what was going on when they were actually doing the carving and how this takes the term tone deaf to an astral plane. Look at this. Stone Mountain carving resumes just days after Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Stonewall Jackson is lauded about being finally back on the mountain by the paper in December 1964. 3 days later, Martin Luther King gets the Nobel Peace Prize. All of this is going on at the same time, in real time, during my lifetime. And you start to sort of look at the monument a little bit differently. This is not something that is anciently carved in stone, but it is carved in stone. Next. Okay, dedication, 1970. this is really interesting. President Nixon was supposed to come 3 days before he bails out, really upsets the organizers, but he sees a PR problem for himself coming to dedicate the Confederate monument. So guess who he sends in? Spiro. So Spiro comes in, he's the perfect man for the job, and there he is coming in on Marine 2. Again, 1970 dedication. At that dedication, next slide, next and final slide, is you see Governor Maddox. Go back, please. You see Governor Maddox, you see the vice president up there on the podium. That day, they also had Reverend William Holmes Borders of Wheat Street Baptist Church, an African-American, to give an invocation. This was an attempt to make it, say, more ecumenical in that it wasn't about race or the Confederacy. It's just about, something else. It wasn't about the lost cause, and we can talk all about the lost cause. But I thought that what happened, though, is that the Venables, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, who are also Venables, got very upset about this. And when you hear a lot of the lost cause narrative going on, you hear it's always never about slavery. The war was not about slavery. It was about tariffs. It was about, frankly, anything but slavery. And so it was interesting to hear what Venables said when he objected to the presence of William Holmes Borders. And he said, and this is great stuff, quote, "The war was fought over the question of slavery, and it is improper for a member of his race to take part in the program. All I can say is out of the mouths of Klansmen." Now, this is just a brief overview to give you some surprises with respect to Stone Mountain and this whole issue about monuments and when they occurred. We can get into it in much more detail now in a minute. I look forward to taking questions from Dr. B.A. and we can listen to the history, we can watch it. And by the way, my favorite TV show when it was completed was MASH. So this wasn't that long ago. Dr. B.A.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sheffield. That was such great context and background to help us be able to have this discussion. So I've got some questions for you. Those of you who registered know that you could ask questions during the registration. So we've got some of those that we'll go through. We'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can, but we're also urging you to keep your Q&A open. And if you have questions, to go ahead and ask them, and we'll have time. If we have time, we'll get to them. So Sheffield, what would you say to someone who wonders whether the removal or relocation of monuments, much like what you showed in your video, in your slides, would be erasing heritage or history of the country?
So I'll start by just saying, in terms of what the Atlanta History Center says, first of all, we try not to be too directive, because nobody wants to hear what we have to say anyway, necessarily, about their monument in their town, right? And so, but we do say status quo is not an option. They either need to be contextualized or removed. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
One or the other, they can't be left alone. Now, I'll start with that baseline. Now, in terms of history versus heritage, you hear that a lot. They're attacking our Southern heritage. My definition of heritage is history with all the bad parts left out, okay? Heritage is the history you want to believe, right? You want to remember. It's, Scottish people running around in kilts and with bagpipes and throwing telephone poles at Grandfather Mountain or whatever they do. It's, people think, a great another example of heritage is Christopher Columbus statues, right? That has really nothing to do with history. That's about what their pride in being Italian, period. And so when you start digging into Christopher Columbus, it gets a little bit more complicated, and that's why some of these issues come up. That's heritage. So to me, it's the issue about history and the monuments. To me, it's a history. I usually refer to them as Jim Crow monuments. They're really not about the Confederacy. They're about the people who erected them at the time. Why did they erect them? What were they for? What was going on in the context? Who was against them? A lot of times African Americans were very vocally against the erection of them. You saw that in Monument Avenue in Richmond, for example. A lot of documentation on that. So that is, take it in context and listen to what people said at the time. But to me, their removal is you're removing that part of Jim Crow history.
Okay.
And that's the history that you're in danger of losing, is why did they erect them at that time? Because the monument's not really about it's about an idea. What idea are they trying to put forth at that period?
Yeah.
So you could be history or heritage. And then the next question is, whose heritage? Whose history?
That's a big question. Why do you think the monuments hold so much sway for people, especially right now?
I think it's because people, for lots of different reasons, feel under attack for their identity. A lot of white people do, for all sorts of political and other reasons. It's been going on for years, and it's also because people were taught how great these leaders were by the people they trusted the most. The white people were. The schools, their parents, their grandparents, United Daughters of Confederacy were incredible about infusing positive issues about the Confederacy and the lost cause into all textbooks, not only in the South, but really throughout the country. And then there are movies like Gone with the Wind that pile onto that. And of course, I already mentioned Birth of a Nation. But there are all sorts of reasons that people have these things that they want to believe. And then when you come at them and say, I want to tear that down, they see a zero-sum response and they react to it. And so.
Okay, all right. So you talked about the lost cause and you told us you would come back to it. So what is the lost cause and how did it become so pervasive? I think you probably mentioned some of it when you talked about the daughters being so persuasive, but could you go into a bit more detail about that?
Well, I mean, it's also been called the Great Rationalization. It's almost a religion, because you have to believe its tenets, and you believe that slavery was not the cause. It was economics. It was tariffs. It was, like I said it earlier, anything really other than slavery is the basis of the reason the secession happened. Of course, if you look at the secession documents, they say otherwise. And this lost cause mythology developed after the war. People were really pretty upfront about what the causes of the war were before. And so that's where you need to look for your evidence. Don't go looking later for white Southerners to explain that it was about slavery. No, they figured out later on that was not a winning argument. And so what they wanted to say was about, this was the Second American Revolution. And there are all sorts of rationales behind that. And people wanted to believe that. And that's what they were taught and they were told, and it went from generation to generation. And it's a powerful thing. A rationalization is a very powerful thing. And this was a great one. And it still pervades today, and it still exists. Even our immigration test, it's there. I mean, it's still taught. Immigration test gives you multiple answers for what the cause of the Civil War, or slavery is just one of them. Economics is another one. States' rights is another one. What does states' rights mean? It means the ability to have slaves, right? So you're right. That's pretty much. But you know, what they try to argue is, don't try to, you know, to shame somebody or tell somebody that they're an idiot because they believe that. That's not really very, very helpful. Talk about the facts. You know, talk about, step back. It's not about you. This is what happened then. Let's just divorce your feelings from the actions that happened then, and let's understand. Maybe we can come with another understanding. Maybe some of the things, for example, these monuments are surprises, will give you the ability to think about something you hadn't thought about before. But if Sheffield comes and tries to convince you that you're completely wrong just like that, your defenses go up and you don't feel like you're being honored.
As opposed to Sheffield giving you information that may be information that you may not have known before.
Right, and then you can process it or not in your own way. I just think it's better received, and this goes back to your dinner table conversation at Thanksgiving. if you want to yell squirrel when somebody's talking about something else, say, well, what do you think about monuments? And get them off topic. You know, then you can get everybody riled up about something else, right? Instead of football or whatever it is. But that is, you know, just, you know, but if you give people the opportunity to listen to you, and if you use language that invites their ability to listen, maybe you'll get a better response. A lot of times you won't. That's okay. Not here to convert everybody.
Okay. Can you explain the current legal landscape in terms of monumental protection laws and how that factors into the conversation?
Sure. So a lot of the monuments, and a lot of, I forgot how many states there are now that's shrinking. It's 6 or 7 southern states protect monuments. Georgia's one of them, from being taken down or removed. So now some clever lawyers in Decatur have come up with ways to get a judge to agree that the monument needs to be moved because it's a hazard under the statute. After the George Floyd murder or death, you know, and all of the uproar around it, there were a lot of monuments that were either defaced or moved, and the government didn't seem to be able to do anything about it. So a lot of these laws are, in a sense, unenforceable, because if a given community wants to remove a monument, they're probably going to remove it one way or the other. I don't suggest that. I'm just saying that's just a reality. I've been against monument protection laws because I think it shuts down the conversation. And I do think there are cases where monuments should be moved, particularly those that are in front of courthouses where people have to walk by the monument to go in and be sentenced in a court of law, or to get a marriage license. They have to go there. There's no other option. They have to walk by that. And you have to remember that one of the things that people really don't think about is that probably a majority of Southerners at the time of the war were against the Confederacy. And people, say, what are you talking about, Sheffield? Well, let's start talking about the fact that 40% of Southerners were enslaved. Okay. Now, oh, you mean Black people are Southerners? Well, you start talking like that and you have an opportunity to shift the conversation a little bit. And that goes to whose heritage? What's the Southern heritage? Well, what about the 40% that were enslaved and the other people who were also against the war in the South, which were a large number? What about their heritage? So It's whose heritage, whose history, and we just need to think about it a little differently, and then maybe take it and put it in a saucer and cool down a little bit, and have some conversations, and not go, it's not zero sum. It's, hey, let's have a conversation about our collective history and maybe our collective future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. In 2017, in the wake of the events that occurred in Charlottesville, you co-chaired the Confederate Monument Advisory Committee to the Atlanta City Council to make recommendations about what to do with city-owned Confederate monuments. Could you talk a bit about that experience with gathering that community input and the committee reconciling or trying to the different perspectives and opinions that people have?
Yeah, that was a great experience. One I don't really necessarily recommend to anybody. That was something Mayor Reed did to me on his way out of town. But he'd done a lot for me too. But it was a great experience to be in. But everything had to be in public. Everything was televised. There was no work behind the scenes really, other than trying to prepare histories of the various monuments. The good news for this committee is that we didn't have to deal with the state capitol monuments or Stone Mountain. We had essentially very few monuments in Atlanta that were a problem or were an issue. 2 of them were in a cemetery. One was the obelisk I talked about early, 1872. I think I misspoke. And then the other one was the the Lion of Lucerne, or the Lion of Confederacy, which has also been attacked recently. It serves mainly as a gravestone for Confederate dead, unknown Confederate dead there in 1890s. And then there was one in Piedmont Park called the Peace Monument. How can that be a problem? And then a very small one on Peachtree Battle that I turned in. I almost felt bad about it. But that was it. And so what we did after a lot of conversation, and the other thing you need to remember is that a lot of the people who came to talk, you can't assume anybody has a particular opinion based on their race or about anything. The last election's proven that too. You just don't know, right? And so we had African Americans come and say, no, I don't want you to remove those monuments. I want you to keep that history. You know, I don't want this place sanitized. I want to talk about the Jim Crow. I want to talk about the period that was going on when those monuments were erected and why. You had others who say, I want them all gone.
Mm-hmm.
So what we ended up coming up with was, and we couldn't remove them under state law, was a compromise where we contextualized them. Big panels, not talking about plaques. I'm an anti-placard. Plaques disappear. Big panels with pictures. People can read. That's what I was interested in, and that's what we approved, and that's what we ended up putting in Piedmont Park and Peachtree Battle and at the cemetery. Now, we did recommend that the one in Piedmont Park be removed, the Peace Monument, but we couldn't, so we contextualized it, and it's still contextualized today. So you can go there, and people actually read it. It's wonderful to go by there.
That's different than the plaques. The plaques.
Yeah, the plaques are little. They put them on, it disappears. I'm talking about museum reader rails. I'm talking about big stuff with photographs. We have two big ones. You cannot miss it. The idea is to take it from an object of veneration turn it into an outdoor exhibit, an artifact.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going on other than the state saying this, you're supposed to, you know, to worship this, or you're supposed to give this great honor. Well, here's explains the fraughtness of it and how even a peace monument can be fraught.
Okay. Should we, and this is a really interesting question, should we continue creating and erecting monuments? And if so, what questions would we ask in order to be able to decide how to do that or what to have those monuments be of?
Well, I think some of them are fabulous. For example, the ones that have been done at the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery around the lynching monuments. I mean, very powerful. You've got to also be careful though, because some of them could be, it's hard to do a good monument, and they can be kitschy if you don't watch out. And you also got to be careful who you put on a pedestal anymore. And particularly, I think there ought to be a rule that nobody who's born after 2011 can be on a monument, because that was the year Snapchat was created. And you know that you're going to find out some issues about those people, right? So we can write them off. That's not possible. But you just got to be careful who you do, how it's done, and get a lot of community input. Mm-hmm. But I think it's appropriate. And I think with some of the monuments, it's time to change the exhibit. I mean, if it's been up for 130 years, maybe it's time to rotate. We do that in museums all the time.
When you say that, Sheffield, you make me think about the idea of what the monuments are for, because if somebody likes the idea of what happened in the war and wants to aggrandize it, then the idea is we don't want it to change because that part we want to stay the same, which is a really different way to think about it, as opposed to, for instance, a museum exhibit that you would change out because things have changed.
Right. Well,
living with is people who are saying, no, my feelings are still the same, keep it there.
Yeah, and that's understandable, right? And that's why we have to talk about history and memory and what these monuments really represent. And the Confederate ones are very fraught. But again, we've come up with Christopher Columbus. You know, that's become a huge issue up north. And I really enjoy having big issues up north. I think that's great for them. But then, for example, others like General Sheridan, A Northern General, United States General in Chicago, very controversial. And I'm like, and I got a call from someone up there asking about how we deal with Confederate monuments because they had a problem with General Sheridan. I said, what's his problem? And they said, well, he was reputed to say only good Indian's a dead Indian. Now, he didn't say that, but he may have thought it. And so you have that whole complexity of issues. So it's just complicated. And that's why we need to get down to the facts. Be careful who you put on a pedestal. Let's think about what the real history is. And then sometimes they're just not appropriate to be there anymore because we've got new information. We've got a different perspective. And then it's time to rotate that exhibit. It just is. And that's the way I look at it. It doesn't mean you've not done away with General Sheridan or Christopher Columbus. They still exist. You haven't erased their history, but you've understood how that they relate a little bit differently to the landscape. And we're talking about what's in the landscape and on public property generally.
Yeah. So is there any possibility that Stone Mountain Park can change its focus? For example, turned into a park of reconciliation?
Well, I have the legislation here, and it says that it's to be a park, and then the number 3 thing under the 1958 legislation was to maintain an appropriate and suitable memorial to the Confederacy. So the first thing you'd have to do, even if you left everything intact on the mountain, and like I said, I'm not saying we have to blow it off, you have to change that. And to me, that's what you need to do. You need to take the public imprimatur of adoration off of it. And then you can have a conversation about what happens to it. So that's easy enough, just delete that. You know, we're lawyers, you know how to do that. You know, delete clause 3, done.
Yeah.
Easier said than done. So that would be the first. Now, in terms of creating some other park, but to me, first step, maybe just turn it into a park. Doesn't have to be about anything. Maybe. Now, maybe you want to do the reconciliation, and that's great too. That's another idea. It's really hard to do. Okay, well, we've got some really smart people and a group of people out there right now, the Stone Mountain Action Coalition, are working on that. Are working on ideas. They don't have any fixed ideas about what it could be, but they want to get public input as to what that might be. If you look at who is out at the park right now, who's walking underneath that monument, who uses it every day, I mean, to me, that is the biggest counter monument to the people that bought the park, to Marvin Griffin. It could be, it's a living monument every day of the most diverse group of people in the state who live around it and who use the park. Yeah. You know, hell, that's a great counter monument. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's build on that. Now, what I would do, I've advocated taking the museum that's at the base of the mountain and turning it into a museum about Jim Crow or these monuments. It's right there. You can tell the truth. Just tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a step. In terms of turning it into something else, have at it.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much the time we have. I want to be sensitive about the questions from the audience if we have some. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Sarah, and you can give us those questions if you have them. Thank you so much. That was awesome. You are
Dr. B.A., I wish I could be in your class.
You are so incredible.
I want to be in your class.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to be in there the next 3 times because I'm on my way out at the end of the semester.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, 3 more classes to go.
All right. So, Sarah, what you got for us? Got anything in the Q&A?
We do. Okay, so first one up. How has DeKalb County been able to remove a Confederate monument in the face of a state law prohibiting monument removals?
Great question.
Well, that was for lawyer Downs in the county, who's a smart lawyer, was able to figure out how to use the statute and use the emergency provisions of it and nuisance provisions of it to have it removed. And they got a judge to agree with them, and they did it. And there was nobody really to stop them. So that's how they did it. Other people are just gone and moved them, and just taken their, but no one is taking any action. I think after George Floyd, there was a lot of, let's just let it go from the state. I just haven't seen really any reactions to it.
For you UGA alum who haven't been back to Athens recently, the one that we had right in that median has been removed as well. The median right across from the arches, that obelisk has been removed as well, with apparently not a lot of fuss being made about it.
All right, Sarah, what else you got for us?
Sure. Next one. It seems easier to remove or contextualize Confederate monuments these days than it is to change the name of federal military bases, 10 of them, named for Confederate generals. Why is that?
Well, let me put it this way. I said the same thing when I was head of the, somebody asked me on TV about Stone Mountain when I was dealing with the city monuments. I said, that's above my pay grade. And I think there's an answer to that, but there was an election recently that may resolve that issue. But I'm gonna leave that there and not touch that one. But I do like what one of the generals said. There have been a lot of brave Americans who've deserve to be honored since the Civil War. So there's an opportunity there to honor a lot of other people. Again, changing the exhibit.
Sarah?
Okay, next up. Are you being consulted on the USG committee reviewing naming of buildings? What advice do you have for this group?
I'm well aware of it, and they know where I am. And I'm very happy that they're doing what they're doing, and I've given them my advice. But I haven't heard from them lately. So, but they are aware of what we've done and what's on our website. At the Atlanta History Center, we have a Confederate Monument Initiative website where you can learn all about Confederate monuments, history, what's going on all over the country with them. And we have a sample contextualization marker that local communities can use. And even the University of Georgia, or the USG committee, I guess it's the committee of the Board of Regents, has access to that. And so we'd be proud for them to use it. University of Mississippi did. So why not University of Georgia, even Georgia Tech? They have an opportunity.
Sarah?
And another one here. Can you review some other world locations that have a similar situation to the South with, quote, rebel monuments, and how is the situation handled?
Well, there's generally not a situation like the South where you have the losers that control the monuments. Okay, we're pretty unique in that way. You could go to South Africa, for example, and they have moved a lot of the Afrikaner monuments inland into some Afrikaner settlements. They've just obviously also removed the Cecil Rhodes statue was removed there several years ago in Cape Town. But I'm not sure that there's a really great parallel. What you've got is places like Ukraine, where there are a group of people who said, no, I want to keep some of those statues that the Russians erected for us, because you know what, they're just right across the border, and we need to remind people of who they are. Then others are saying, no, let's move them, let's take them down. So there is that controversy about, let's not forget the history, but it's not a history of, not a good history.
Any more, Sarah? Got a few more minutes.
We do have a couple. Is this a local discussion about each monument in each county, or is there a one size fits all?
Good question.
In my view, it's all local. And it's best done locally because those are the people that are most familiar with the monument, why it was, once they learn why it was erected, who was erected, and what the community tolerance for it is. And even if you have people who disagree that it shouldn't be viewed this way, a lot of times people will say, you know, I disagree, but I also we don't think we need this kind of conflict in our community. So I think that it should be done at the community level. I think people should work out on their own. They should look at the facts. It's why we have this monument interpretation guide, so that people can learn how to do the research of what their monuments are really about. And then they can go to the appropriate body and make an argument. Maybe it's to move it, maybe it's to remove it, maybe it's to contextualize it. But to get a conversation going based around the facts, not about polemics. So I think local is the way to go, because you know each other, and it's harder to be mean to your neighbor than it is for somebody who's from out of town to come in and tell you what to do. So in the best of all worlds, it would be local. That's why I think that you shouldn't have statewide laws that prohibit people from locally dealing with the monument issue.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on Confederate symbols in historic graveyards?
You know, I think a graveyard is a graveyard. And I think a lot of people believe that if you're going to have them anywhere, have them in a graveyard. Now, I'm not necessarily for moving things to graveyards, but if something was originally erected there, and particularly in an early time, I think that's, you know, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't go around messing with graveyards. I think I think you're bound to stir up more animosity there than's worth.
And my thought is, what you've been talking about is public monuments as opposed to private ones that somebody would have in a graveyard. For instance, the graveyard that's right there by UGA, if you go in, there are places where people who are buried there were a part of the Confederacy, and there is some notation about that there. Very different than a public thing that taxpayer money was used for that does not represent the interest of all the citizens of the state.
Yeah, and you choose to go there. It's a different thing when you're walking down Main Street and there it is in front of you, celebrating something that kept your ancestors enslaved.
Yeah. And a mindset that keeps that wanting to have that keep going. Anything else, Sarah?
Let's see. I think that may be all we have time for. If you've got your last question, Dr. BA.
Okay. Well, I wanted to I'm so glad you remembered that, because I wanted to actually ask if there were more resources that the center has that you could share with us, Sheffield, for people who want to take this further, either for their own purposes or for monuments that they're interested in.
Yeah, go to our website under the research tab, Confederate Monuments Initiative. Just Google that and you'll come up with it. And we've got a lot of resources there. We keep adding to it, changing it. We're learning. We started this 5 years ago and we've added a lot, changed a lot. It's something that we're growing with. And we'd love to have people to use it. Like I said, the University of Mississippi did. We had no idea. It was like perfect. It's out there and it's available and people use it. We don't know if they do use it or not. But take a look at it and it can help. It can help frame the questions that you should ask.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Sheffield. You really are awesome. I appreciate this so much. And I have no doubt that everybody who has tuned in got a lot out of it and probably learned something they didn't know before. So I will turn it back over to Sarah now, but thank you so much.
Gobble, gobble.
You are funny too. Thank you, Sheffield.
Thank you, Dr. B.A.
Dr. B.A. Sheffield, thank you. What a fascinating and important discussion. We've all learned something new, I hope. I do have a couple quick announcements to share before we send everyone off. The mission of our Atlanta chapter is to provide opportunities like this one to engage a diverse spectrum of our area's UGA alumni across all ages and background, and our goal is to expand and develop community. So we hope that you enjoyed hearing the incredible insights and perspectives from these two wonderful guests, and we hope you learned something new today. So what's next on our calendar? If you're interested, our next professional development event will be about a month from today, December 17th at noon, and it's going to be a panel about building operational resilience with Bulldog 100 CEOs Brittany Toms from C-Spark Go and Catherine Mason from Sculpt House. So in terms of next steps, I know a lot of you may already follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, but there's also a chapter newsletter that goes out exclusively to our chapter listserv members. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss anything and you get first dibs on event registration, make sure you're signed up for the Atlanta chapter listserv to see if there's anything out there that interests you. To do that, visit alumni.uga.edu and then go to Find My Chapter to see all of the ways that you can connect with us. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you all have a terrific week, and go Dogs.